Hi, everyone. I'm Rashmi Gopinath. I'm part of the Microsoft Ventures team based here in San Francisco. As you can imagine, we're a global company, so we do look at investments worldwide. The initial few investments that we've made were based in the US, but that's, again, given our own personal network. But the goal is definitely to look at worldwide investments. And prior to this, I was an investor with Intel Capital, which, again, being the arm of Intel, had a pretty global presence. And we had investment professionals based in Europe as well. So pretty familiar with investments in different continents and different countries.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Michel, for having us. I'm a partner at General Catalyst. We are a venture capital firm with $4 billion in management with offices in Boston, New York, and here. We invest both in consumer and enterprise, mostly companies here. We have occasionally invested overseas, but we're always open to companies which are moving from Europe or Australia or Asia and setting up their executive teams in the Bay Area or in Boston, New York. We are happy to help them as well. Some of our investments include companies such as Kayak.com, Demandware, BigCommerce, Snapchat, Airbnb, Stripe, Warby Parker, Honest Company, and a few others. So I personally focus on enterprise, B2B, everything from cybersecurity to cloud infrastructure, DevOps, enterprise apps. Thank you.
Very good. Thanks for that. So both of you have, over the years, been involved in looking at numerous European companies and invested maybe in some of them. What are sort of the main differences or advantages, disadvantages that you can see in those, if you can generalize in some form? Maybe Deepak, start.
Thank you. I think when we generally look at companies, we usually, the first filter to apply is it a good company? It starts with that. Where the company is located is irrelevant. Of course, you would like to only invest in companies that are based here. That is mainly because we can help them better if they're based here. So we would have the discussion, are you going to move here? Is it part of your plan? Don't move just because of us, but is it part of your plan? Then we ask them that question. So I think the obvious disadvantages for anybody who's not in the Valley, whether you're coming from Europe or Boston or New York or Australia or Asia, is that you just don't know the ecosystem here. You just don't know how the chatter goes, how the fundraising works, how the networks are here. So you need to penetrate a new network. So that's the obvious disadvantage. But those disadvantages are becoming lesser important in the larger scheme of things nowadays, because most investors, they can figure out how well your startup is doing from the outside. They can see what your what your ranking on the Apple App Store is. They can figure out GitHub stars if it's an open source project on GitHub. So there are ways in which investors look at stuff from the outside today. So talent is obviously universal, and everybody recognizes that. And we all know most of the companies here, not most, but good chunk of the best companies built here have been built by people coming from outside the Valley. The advantages are, when you are coming from outside an ecosystem, you have a different way of thinking. And the bar is higher, so you are a lot more hustling to do the right thing. And you definitely need to have a much stronger customer focus. Sometimes if you're just too much in the Valley, you might just get caught up in, how do I get the next press article on TechCrunch, which might not be like the best validation. The best validation is how do you get more customers or consumers or users using your product. So we generally find people from outside have much stronger end user focus than people here, because it's easy to get caught up in the Valley echo chamber. And also, in some ways, it's easier for you also to get press attention. If you have a good story saying, hey, you just moved from this remote village in Slovenia to the Bay Area, and you're doing this, and you've done that, the press would like to cover that story. Underdog stories are usually read more, and the press likes to cover that. And good stories are always hard to come by, and differentiated stories are even harder to come by.
Good. Rashmi?
Sure. And in our sense, I'm going to echo what Deepak said. For us, the primary lens of evaluating a company would be the same, regardless of where it's located. So having a strong team having a strong product, building a disruptive technology, that's going to be the most important pieces. Where you're located would be secondary, because even if you were based in Europe, if you have the ability to really build a strong differentiated company, if you're going to be able to show traction, we're still going to invest in you regardless of where you are. Being in Europe, I think, has some advantages as well. You have access to a great pool of talent that's not as heavily competitive as it is here. In fact, we know a lot of startups that are based here that have their talent and engineering talent based back in Eastern Europe and other places, just because it's lower cost as compared to building an engineering pool of talent here. And of course, if you continue to show the traction, there's been a number of examples. We talked about a few of them. So companies like Spotify, SoundCloud, Shazam, I mean, they've all been based there, have had successful growth and trajectories. So if you're one of those companies that are really, I mean, building the next big company, then you shouldn't be too worried about where you're going to be based at. You are going to get noticed. You are going to get the visibility. And the venture funds here will be willing to work with you.
Yeah, I actually myself tend to tell all of these European entrepreneurs who are very concerned about coming here in one form or another that they're actually, you have absolutely no disadvantage, but you have no advantage either. You're just the same, because here in the Valley, people are not really interested in where you're coming from. They're all interested in where you're going. And I think that's something which is culturally sort of a little bit of a flip for Europeans, because we are very sort of culture, tribe, language, this and that centric. And here, look at the stage, we're all Silicon Valley VCs, and we're not like the average American as most of people in Europe will think. And that's because here it doesn't make any difference where you're coming from. And I think that's a really, really strong thing to keep in mind. Secondly, or a different way of putting it, is that this is where we have the Olympics. When you go to the Olympics, it doesn't make any difference where you're coming from. You have to be the best. And to qualify for the Olympics, you have to be top tier in the world. And as many companies as we have seen over the years in Europe that are good companies, but they are not necessarily of international level or class. And I think and they have similar companies here in the States, don't play a game where you cannot win. Pick the right level for yourself and do the best there. And that's not to say that everybody shouldn't be achieving for as high of a goal as they can, but there are companies needed and people needed on every level in the stack, and each one of them cannot be a Google or a Facebook or a Uber or something else. So something to keep in mind for them. So in terms of then looking at some of these European companies, do you prefer to look at them sort of at the later stage when they have already some European investors involved and do co-investment with them, or would you rather get them sort of as soon as you usually get companies here? And maybe, Rashmi, yeah.
So for us, given that, again, we're aligned with technology units at Microsoft, the preference would be to co-invest with a lead European investor. But of course, as we continue to build out our own team and have our own team presence in Europe, that becomes much more easier, since the person that's going to be based there will have the local expertise and will be able to help grow the company. At the end of the day, it's not just about the money. You want to bring investors that's going to be able to help grow your company. So you want local presence there, people that know the market, that can help you with your growth strategies, help you expand and grow into the big company that we all like to grow. We all like you to grow into. So from that aspect, you would need someone that knows that space that you're in and can help advise you with that. So at this point, we're open to co-investing, but as we continue to build our own team there, it was similar to what we had at Intel as well. We had local team in Europe that would typically lead an investment, and then we would help the companies from the US as well.
Deepak, thoughts?
It's depends on the company and depends upon somebody getting passionate in the. I'm just giving you like a practical answer. In the partnership, who they have been looking into the space, they like that space. So we have partnered with overseas companies, whether they're in Series A or Series C or Series D. So we have had examples of those. Now, typically, it's harder in the earlier stages. It's a little bit easier in the later stages because there are more things to evaluate. But we have done companies in the early stages as well. The real question is, if you are a company focused on international markets, are you poised to become like the leading player, like Zendesk was poised to become the leading player in that space? That's the real question. Are you, do we believe that you can be a leader? So whenever we believe that, it could be in Series A, it could be in Series B or Series C, then it becomes easier to invest.
Yeah. So again, from a partly European investor's point of view, I think that one of the things that is really important to realize and remember is that Europe is chock full of research and technology and really smart people who often tend to be more sort of technology or subject matter oriented than commercially oriented. And that's, of course, one of the things that venture capitalists have traditionally brought into those kinds of scenarios. It's more of the commercial view of things, and we have certainly over the years, in many ways, sort of helped people come out of their shell and really, you can build a business around this. And that's not exactly the kind of entrepreneurs that we usually fund here, because here people expect more of a full package. And one of the things that Europe has to work in different ways over the years is actually to form and hone their entrepreneurs more into being a full package than just a very strong sort of technology side of it. But that then, on the other hand, also speaks for that it's, in many cases, they need to get their first level of investment in Europe initially, because a US, a Silicon Valley investor would often not really invest in that kind of a early stage package, which then a secondary thing from that is that we actually in Europe have to work really hard on getting the next level of growth capital available. I think that we're, in most parts, are doing really well at this point in terms of seed capital and getting small things up and going. But then the next step in terms of where most of the money in Europe goes into is private equity, sort of buyouts and really late stage stuff. And there is a very, very important gap in between that is partly being filled by investors from here and elsewhere. But that's definitely one of the areas where Europe has to sort of shape up its own game. So final thoughts on, you mentioned Zendesk, and there's lots of other sort of successful companies, some of them who have made it sort of exclusively here, some of them have come here halfway and so forth. Any specific thoughts, trends, or things that you would pick up, why they would have been more successful because they were European originally or from European founders than taking sort of the average deal here that we find here in the Valley?
I would say the crux of it is still the same. If they are solving a general problem that would be applicable worldwide versus to a specific market, I mean, that's what differentiates you from becoming a really large company to being more focused on specific geographies or specific sectors. I mean, Zendesk is one great example. There's companies like Spotify and others as well. If you are looking at a general purpose platform that is globally applicable and serves multiple markets in multiple areas, you are looking at a pretty large growth. You're looking at attracting investors from outside of your own countries. So at least in my mind, that would be key.
Yeah.
No, I agree. I mean, there's always exception to the rules and exceptions to patterns. Just as Rashmi pointed out, right, companies that have become very successful in Europe in the past have been those that are focused on consumers, like Shazam or Rovio or Supercell and King, or companies that are focused on SMBs, like Zendesk. I think we haven't seen too many, high-end enterprise companies that build very expensive enterprise sales teams being successful out of Europe for different reasons. But if you are selling online, then it doesn't matter where you are. If you're selling using physical people, then where you are, matters a bit. What the other part of the story is that it's harder to find high-end enterprise talent in Europe, like the next Cisco engineers or Juniper engineers or Microsoft engineers. They're not there. Most of them are here. So that's a pattern I've noticed. It might change in the future.
Very good. Thank you. Rashmi, Deepak, thank you very much for your input.
Yeah, thank you, Michel.
Thanks.